Tony Edwards.
I think that's me.
That's correct. Have a look around, check if he's here.
Yeah, no, it's me.
So when did you actually start drawing?
Oh, look, as a kid, like a very young kid. And I think the most encouraging thing that happened when I was in 4th class, so that'll be 1954, we had an incredibly beautiful primary school teacher, Miss Norrie. And I don't know how I discovered, but she really liked drawings of cliffs and, storm-tossed seas and angry skies. And whenever I'd do one and put it under her nose, it sort of had a strange effect on her. Anyway, she was incredibly affectionate. She kissed me and hugged me, and I couldn't believe it. I didn't quite know what it was, why I felt the way I did, but I knew that it was something I quite enjoyed. And so I made the link between sexual attraction and drawing at the age of 10 or something like that.
So you were using it to flirt with the primary school teacher?
Yeah. But sort of sadly, and there was a little lesson in there. Halfway through the year, she eloped with the sports master. So I lost my grip on it completely and realised that muscles won over pens every time.
So did you draw a kind of very disturbing picture of the sports master, a caricature?
No,
an angry caricature?
No, it didn't occur to me. I think I was heartbroken. He was a big kind of hunky, muscular bloke. We caught them chewing each other's faces off in the classroom one day, and I didn't know what they were doing. I thought, what are they doing that for? So I wasn't very. I didn't have much knowledge about those affairs then.
Did you draw caricatures of friends and teachers and people? Was that something evolved?
Later, when we moved to Sydney and I went to Manly High, I started drawing the more horrible teachers, and in a kind of disturbing way, I suppose. Because there were a number of teachers that were probably shell-shocked from World War II, so they had idiosyncratic behaviour, but they were often quite sadistic or unpleasant, and we still had corporal punishment in schools then. So the ones that dished it out got the worst treatment on the page. So there was one teacher we had called Mr. Cocking. I'd draw him being lashed to a rock by being rooted by a donkey, or or someone lopping his head off. So it was real schoolboy stuff, and the kids loved it, of course. And the more horrible, pulling their guts out or whatever. Then I started drawing blokes with big dicks, and I had a scheme to do like a series of about 20 drawings of things you could do with a big dick. And anyway, my mother found them in my drawer, and because they had very high hopes for me. They thought I was going to be a talented lad, and she found these, and she said, "Oh, you've got a horrible little mind, And so she burnt them all. So that project went out the spout.
Was it treated by your parents as a talent, your drawing ability?
Oh, yeah, well, they saw that I had a gift. Well, they were sort of from Melbourne, Bohemia, I suppose, but they were used to people that had turned their talent into an occupation, So Dad had friends, some of them from the war, who were, one in particular who was a commercial artist, and he used to offer me a lot of encouragement. And I think they thought, that I might achieve something, but I was a slow developer. It turned out sad, which is a cause of sadness for me that Dad never saw my flowering. He'd died before I'd achieved anything, which is rather sad. Mum always hated Captain Goodvibes. She couldn't believe it. I did a kids' book around a similar time, and she loved that. She could be proud of that, but she was absolutely ashamed of me for doing the pig.
So it occurred from a young age, it was apparent that your artistic ability was accompanied by a sort of a wicked sense of humour bobbling around in your brain.
Yes, well, of course, it was self-discovery was involved. I didn't know I had a wicked sense of humour until I started drawing and realised, you know, you get a bit of, you get into a feedback loop, think, oh, God, that's disgusting, you know, what can I do next, you know? So, yeah, I led myself on.
You had to go on a serious career. You went to university to study architecture.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a funny story about how you got kicked out, though.
Oh, yeah, for failing maths.
That's right.
Yeah, no. Anyway, it wasn't funny at the time. It was...
Didn't you tell them that you'd sat the exam and they'd lost the exam?
Yeah. Look, it's probably unusable, but I actually went in to do the exam, and on the way in, the bus, the 190 from Palm Beach, the bus had a crash at Neutral Bay, and a girl who I knew, I was standing up with her, was quite, not badly injured, but it took the skin off both her. Her bones were exposed on one of her legs. And when we got to Wynyard, I said, I'll walk you up to the hospital, because she couldn't walk by herself. So I walked her up to the hospital and, of course, knew that in the process that I was missing the exam, you know. Anyway, many years later, when we moved here, it turns out the girl I helped up to the hospital was the sister of the man who lives next door here.
Right.
And he said, oh, I'll mention it, Diane, her name was. He said, I'll mention it to her, and she couldn't remember. But it was one of those moments in my life that was the fork in the road. What do I do? And I decided, probably took the cow's way out and appeared to be a good Samaritan, you know. But it buggered up my time at university. I had to leave for failing maths.
I guess in those years, though, in your teenage years, was that when you had your first exposure to surf culture whilst living on the northern beaches?
Yeah, well, Midget Farrelly was... I couldn't surf because I was too fair, you know. I'd go out... I almost got sunburnt inside, you know.
Yeah.
It was... I mean, I'd go for a swim, but then I'd pay for days afterwards with bloody sunburn. But no, Midget went to the school, and there was a couple of the early balsa board manufacturers in the same street as the high school. I think it was one called Gordon Woods or...
Yep.
Yeah, anyway. And one of my friends at school was called Lester Bryan. He wrote for the school magazine. That was my... Yeah, geez, I'm sorry, I'm mucking all this up. But anyway, Lester asked me to illustrate an article he'd written about the evolution of surfing. So the first illustration I ever got published was in the Manly High School magazine, illustrating Lester's article. And I had a couple of cavemen with logs or something like that. I've got it somewhere, I can dig it out. But, yeah, so that was the first real contact with that sort of thing. But I never thought it'd go anywhere from that.
But did you have a very... did it fill your mind with sort of a rich idea of what the surfing characters were like and what the culture was like even from a young age?
Well, at that time they were kind of rebels, you know. It was regarded with, I think, the mainstream culture regarded it with suspicion. You know, I remember Midget his hair was too long, which was, it would look like a crew cut now, but it came down over his collar, and he was told that if he didn't get his hair cut, he'd have to leave school. It was that, I mean, you forget how stitched up our society was in the 50s and early 60s. And what we wouldn't even notice now was a serious misdemeanour.
Were you... 1950s Australia and even early 60s was a more conservative place. Were you desperate to rebel against that as well?
Well, no, you know, I don't know that I had such remarkable self-knowledge. You know, I mean, I knew there was something irritating me about the world, but, you know, I wasn't political or particularly rebellious. I was just a nerdy kind of, you know, a bit of a misfit. Bit of a loner. No, I didn't want to rebel at all. That came later.
So you went, after you sort of left uni, or unceremoniously, I think you went off to London for a little time.
Yeah, no, we went, Sal and I we went and had a honeymoon before we got married. So we went to India and all those other, Nepal and Afghanistan and a few places, and then went to England, and I got a job working for an architect there, who was the royal family's architect. I didn't know that at the time, but so I did a bit of work for the royals. It sounds interesting, but it wasn't.
No.
Being a draftsman is really, it's probably about the same as being dead, but.
So is that around the time that sort of those famous Australian expats were knocking around England, sort of the Jermaine Greers and the Clive James, and was that?
No, they were earlier. They were late 60s.
Yep.
We went there in 72 or 73, and of course they lived in their own stratosphere. I was just a kind of an anonymous wage slave at that stage. I met some of them later. What do you call it? I can't think. There's a collegiate thing between people who've done stuff in the media, and suddenly they just know you.
Yep.
They don't walk up and introduce themselves. They know you. So, and it would be uncool to do otherwise. So I went along with it. I thought that's funny. These people wouldn't have wiped their feet on me a couple of years ago.
Yeah. So back in Australia, and I guess had you sort of fashioned half a career as a draftsman, and then. Can you remember the moment of inception for Goodvibes?
Well, sort of, but I'd come home from work and we'd have a glass of wine and I'd just doodle, I was just sort of doodling. And I did a couple of, maybe it was 2 stages, I did a couple of things and took them up here to Avalon to meet a friend who was a surfer. And we went to lunch there, and I said, "Oh look, I've got a couple of drawings here. I'll just show you." And they preceded Goodvibes by about 6 months, I think, and they were sort of surf related. And it turned out there was a young guy there who was the guest editor of this funny little magazine called Tracks. They'd had some internal disruption at Tracks magazine. It was run by 3 guys, and they disagreed and it split up. So they had guest editors for a while, including my friend Jeff Watson. But this guy, John Barnes, it wasn't at all like a surfer. He was more like an academic, sort of bookish. And he said, "Oh, show me those." He said, "Oh yeah, we'll publish those." And I thought, "Oh, okay, that'd be great." So then, as a result of that first little encounter, he said, "Why don't you do something every month?" They were just top of the page sort of things, 4 or 5 frames. So I just one night did this doodle and showed it to Sal. She said, "No, that's crap." It was someone offering a bank teller a joint, and she said, "No, that's childlike, Tone. Do something else." So I did this other one. It was a sort of a mini. It was kind of pig-like, but it had lots of tentacles coming out of his head. And I did that, and Sal thought of the name. She said, "Oh, call it Captain Goodvibes." I thought, "Oh, what a great idea." There you go, that was it.
So your partner gets the credit for the name?
No, of course, as is in this paternalistic society, I get all the credit. And that was the first and last time she ever had anything to do with the strip.
Yeah. So when he first launched, was he an amalgamation of other characters you saw, or alter egos? Did you have something or someone in mind, or
making it up as I go along? Wonder Warthog was a huge. I think I blatantly ripped off some of the things from that.
Yeah.
Although interestingly, a friend at the ABC took some of my strips and showed them to the guy the American guy called Gilbert Shelton, who did Wonder Warthog. And he said, "This guy's getting accused of ripping you off. Have a look." And he looked at him and said, "No, it's nothing like nothing to do with me, Anyway, so he didn't see it as being a rip-off. But no, look, it was, again, I didn't have great self-knowledge, so you just draw whatever falls into your head.
Right. He felt sort of like a superhero, though, with special powers, or who was sort of also flawed, and also had a bad flatulence problem.
Yeah. Well, I think it was essentially I was just channeling the schoolboy me. You know, the old thing about it's hard to beat the bucket of shit if you're looking for laughs. You know, it's hard. It's hard to beat a bum joke. You know, which is essentially a schoolboy philosophy, but it worked for me. You know, and it seemed to work for the strip. So it was all you know, hissing, farting, and vomiting. Really, I thought this is, you know, there's endless possibilities in this. Of course, there aren't, but you know.
He kind of false started, didn't he? Like he actually launched, and then you had a bit of a crisis of self-doubt about it.
No, I just lost interest in it. You know, after I think 2 or 3 strips, I just said, "Oh, that'll do for that," because I didn't really want to be a cartoonist. You know, it was a little sideline. I really wanted to paint, and so I just I said to the guys, I think they had a different editor at this because they were changing editors every few months. I said, "Look, that'll do. I think I'm burnt out on that one." And Sal was pregnant with our, and it was a big year that year. My dad died, and a couple of other things happened, and I didn't give it another thought. And then we'd moved up to King's Cross, and there was a knock on the door one day, and there was this fresh-faced young American guy there, John Grissom. He said he was a really likeable sort of bloke. Anyway, he said, "I'm the new editor of Tracks, and I've got something for you." And he pulled out this sheath of fan letters. I'd never seen one, you know. Being a draftsman, it's very, very quiet and removed from the everyday world, you know. I said, "Well, what are these?" He said, "These are for you." And I read them, and it made me, I wanted to cry. You know, some of them they'd done these elaborate drawings, and I'll bring back the captain. I thought, Jesus, what's going on here? You know, it was just the first contact with media and the power of it. You know, I mean, it's not that powerful, but you know, it was a very dramatic moment for me when that happened.
Yeah, that's
and
it.
Anyway, we then consumed a flagon of appallingly cheap white wine. He staggered off to catch the bus home. It was big time production in those days, and I went and threw up. But
in the spirit of the captain, yeah.
So, that was the beginning of it. So they wanted to run it again.
Yep. Was a bit of life imitating art there sometimes, and vice versa.
Yeah. Well, also I'd left my job to be a painter.
Yeah.
Overlooking the fact that I only had $200 in the bank, and Sally was 6 months pregnant. You know, so I was never good at planning ahead, and so
suddenly this was a staple job.
Bread
and butter.
Bread and butter that wasn't working as a draftsman.
Yep. It felt like from the outset that everyone was fair game, though. Politicians, crooked cops, shifty priests, corporate culture. Anyone was, you know, could be taken down in a good vibes.
Yeah. Well, yes. I don't think it was. I'm having trouble recalling the specifics, but it wasn't specifically political.
Yeah.
And I don't think I really knew what satire was. You know, it was I was essentially learning on the job, making it up as I went along. So if there was satire and political comment, I was grasping for straws. You know, but as time went by, of course, you acquire some of the imperatives of cartooning, but they weren't there at the beginning, that's for sure.
I guess, was it great fun, though, to have this character that you could climb into with your imagination, and you basically had license to take him wherever you wanted to. You could go overseas, you could go back in time. That must have been a lot of fun to think.
Yeah, look, it was, but then, like with everything, when it becomes industrial, as it started to, you know, they wanted to do comic books and this and that, everything in my life started to be related to the pig. So that starts to leach the pleasure out of it. You know, it becomes an obligation, and you've got deadlines and all that sort of thing. And I was getting a bit sick of it, but there wasn't anything else I could do. You know, I was essentially unemployable because by that stage, draftsmanship was being replaced by it was disrupted by technology. You know, I started not to enjoy it anymore. And also, I'm not a planner in life, and I never planned a strip out, like a lot of people. Well, it's the same with your writing, You sit down and basically rough out the shape of what you're going to do. I never did that. I'd do the frame and then think, what in the hell is going to happen now? And if I was probably playing a game with myself, so I'd say, I'll just draw this and it's impossible to take this anywhere. And then I'd puzzle for ages over what
so the picture would always come first and then you'd sort of create the words afterwards.
Or it became an excruciating process.
You never saw it in totality.
Oh, no. I had no idea.
You'd grind your way to the end somehow, which became part of the fun because the reader never knew where it was going to go next.
But apparently some writers do that. That's the way they work, but most don't, and I can see why. It's not a relaxing way of working. But
I guess by then, though, you must have enjoyed, as again, parts of Australia are still quite conservative. Did you enjoy taking a few pot shots?
Oh, yeah. And when I remember when the first comic book came out, that someone contacted Trax and said that the bishop of one of the whatever they call bishopric, or I can't remember. Anyway, one of the bishops of the Melbourne municipality objected to it and wanted it removed from the municipal library, So I quite liked all that sort of petty mischief,
Did you ever get even any real trouble?
Well, only with someone we knew, who a couple, when we lived up at Palm Beach at this stage, we were renting an old place up there, and someone who we knew socially, they weren't friends, but we just knew them, blamed me for their son getting onto heroin. Because there was, in the 70s, up here anyway, there was a plague of it, a lot of smack around. And a lot of the younger kids who were probably a generation below me, say 10 or 15 years younger than me, were hooking right into it. And this poor young bastard, it ruined his life. And the parents, looking for something to blame me and had a go at me about that. So that's probably the only... It was pretty uncomfortable.
That's a heavy guilt.
Because they were sort of neighbours.
But I guess, Goodvibes was defined by a lack of restraint in many respects. He could drink as much and swallow as much and do as many things as he wanted to, but it was almost like he did the indulging for you. So it was almost like a venting of those things vicariously.
Yeah.
So he didn't have to do it because the pig was doing it for you.
Yeah, I've always had difficulty in thinking that something like that could corrupt someone to make a life-changing decision like becoming a heroin addict. Although
he stayed off the hard stuff pretty much. He never went near. He didn't mind a bomb or a bit of dope. But he pretty much stayed off the hard stuff. Vibes. I think it was almost
and chemicals. He liked sort of cleaning chemicals. Or sort of solvents and things like that.
Which no one was going. He was also proudly unemployed. He almost had having a job almost felt like a cop-out for Goodvibes.
Yeah, well, I suppose that the influence for that came from the community that was around me up here, that everyone was sort of youthful or becoming professionally unemployed, if that's sort of, it is a contradiction, but there was a sort of a playful, youthful culture here, which involved, not taking the responsibility for being an adult or your own life, and living for as little as possible and doing as little straight work as possible. So, and basically devoting yourself to surfing and rooting and drinking beer. So, which at the time, we were renting a place for almost nothing. Sal's never been a particularly demanding partner, so we couldn't help but enjoy the hedonism that was involved in all this. And yes, it was socially irresponsible and probably elitist in a way. Who could afford to be wasting their lives like that?
But I guess it gave him an interesting perspective from which to comment upon the absurdities of mainstream culture. Like I'm on the classic artist perspective. I'm on the outside looking in almost.
Well, it was a bit like that. Yes, yeah. But I didn't sort of entirely realise that.
Yeah.
You know? But of course, probably the best thing about what I was doing was that it unconsciously revealed things that I probably would make me blanch, that I didn't intend to do, but of course you do. Just by the fact that you're doing it all the time.
I think I was reading one strip where actually you gave Goodvibes the job to hunt down the dole bludgers.
Oh,
and
yeah.
then eventually he gets the sack for doing that and winds up making the tune.
Well, he did obviously some legitimate. Yes, well, I think in one of the early strips he was sniffing out the dope fiends and the bludgers, and so he was playing the enemy.
He was actually launched as I think in the very first strip he was a crime fighter.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, a rather unsuccessful one.
Yeah. But I guess it's sort of we were talking about it before. Sometimes people look at cartoons and assume that everything or every concept projected or raised is the ideology or the thoughts of the creator. Often it's not. It's just you just stirring the pot and
or desperately, raking round inside the collection of dead brain cells for an idea. That's what I was hinted at before, is that it became industrial. Or the output had to become industrial.
Sure. I did read one of the letters that said, it was just a quick one. Captain Goodvibes is cooler than Fonzie, but. The interesting thing about that is that obviously Fonzie's a very American character.
Yeah.
It was, Happy Days popular at the time, and it's a compliment. But was it, I guess, gratifying to create something that was quintessentially Australian?
Yes. I didn't really realise it until afterwards. That I didn't realise that I'd touched a nerve. I began to. Or I put it out of my mind, it sort of. I found it very both gratifying and utterly distracting to think that there were people out there that enjoyed it so much. Or like people carved statues of it and did, it generated in a tiny way. I mean, it wasn't huge, but it was a bit huge for me because I was absolutely unaccustomed to this, but yes, I thought there was an interesting irony because I'm a sort of solitary creature. I'm a little bit. I enjoy my own company. I don't watch football or anything like that. I keep pretty much to myself, and somehow I managed to touch a nerve in the popular culture.
You surprised yourself, yeah.
I surprised myself. I thought, that's strange. Maybe you can do it through the mask of the pig, putting the snout on, and I don't know, because I wouldn't have regarded myself as an astute observer of the world around me.
Did you ever use the captain to take aim at someone specifically, or for revenge? Did you ever have someone really in mind that you wanted to get back at a little bit?
Look, I probably did. I remember a couple of friends were very involved in the anti-sand mining movement, back in I think it was a company called Dillingham's. Mm-hmm. I had a number of goes at them, but not referring to...
Dillingham's not at your friends.
No.
Well, Goodvibes was an environmentalist ahead of his time.
But although in a later incarnation he did have a go at the environment, I put him in the other way, putting him as the villain.
Yep.
I don't think anyone liked that, including me. I mean, he was awful, But again, I think that was just the fact that I felt like that I'd gone through every possibility and scenario that I could think of, and I thought, I'll switch his role now. I'll make him the villain, and it surprised and shocked me as well.
Did you ever find yourself poised in front of the page, like trying to come up with an idea and then coming up with one and thinking, don't know if I can go there?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah, of course there were. I think in the early days, Whitlam had just been in power for a year. I think he sort of abolished the kind of petty censorship that had been around, so you could suddenly say a whole lot of things in print that you couldn't have done before or depicted them. But yes, there are a lot of areas I wouldn't go in.
But you went. Sometimes I think you went there anyway. You probably went
Yeah,
there.
well, yes, and also it's interesting to compare the zeitgeist then with now. You know, I mean, things that were dashed off or said casually, you know, like homophobic remarks or racist remarks, or no one thought very much about it. You know, it was not really being rebellious or out of step by using that. But to look at it now in hindsight, I think I mentioned it to you when you said you were going to rerun some. I thought there's a lot of stuff in there that you just can't say anymore because it's wrong. Getting back to what I mentioned before about Mr. Leake, you know, you shouldn't punch down, and you know, making gratuitous slurs about people's gender choices or their gender or their race is rightly no longer condoned, you know, and it's sort of, I wouldn't if I was doing that sort of thing, I certainly wouldn't go there now. But yeah, it was part naivety and part just the spirit of the time.
Did you have much pushback from editors or anyone? Did you have free rein, more or less?
Yeah, no, pretty free rein. I think it was because it was popular. They probably didn't want to. I think one of the early ones, when Albie was still the proprietor, Albie Felsen was still the proprietor, he got a bit upset over something and he pulled one. I had to do it again. But that was the only time it happened. I mean, the main problem was when the editors were professional, you know, like Phil Jarrett, who'd been a cadet journalist. He'd been through the mill, so he knew what he should be doing. He could spell and read and write and all that sort of thing. And I didn't know I couldn't spell. I'm dyslexic. You know, I had no idea that I was. I thought I was spelling fine, but they decided no, we won't alter it. We'll just leave it as it is because it's part of the character of it. You know? But also it was part of the punk ethos, I think, because it was concurrent with the punk era, although distinct from it. But so no pushback. They more or less said, and of course you learn to self-censor. You learn what you don't do. You know.
Was there you mentioned to me once a fabulous case of sort of mistaken identity when you'd drawn Nat Young in some capacity, and then I think he showed up to an exhibition for you looking for you. I had a show and it was mostly Goodvibes cartoons at the Paddington Town Hall. Yep.
And it was a fantastic night. It was our first show, you know, and so I had a whole lot of Goodvibes strips, a lot of other stuff, a few kind of early paintings. And Nat, who's a friend, came along, as did half of Sydney, it seemed, plus the then publisher bloke called Philip Mason. Mm-hmm. And Philip had bought tracks, but he was from another world altogether. You know, he was a publishing person in English, and he had under his stewardship, there'd been a gossip column that appeared, implying that Nat was particularly well equipped in the below the belt department, and I think it said that he had the biggest dick on the East Coast or something. It was something like
in
that.
One of his other publications.
No, it was in Tracks.
In Tracks, okay. Yeah.
And he was just in a new relationship at that stage, and I don't think he particularly it made him feel uncomfortable that he quite possibly did have the biggest dick on the East Coast, but or possibly the world, but he felt uncomfortable that this was public knowledge, and so he came along, and if Nat had a problem, the way to solve it was with fists. You didn't, he would never be in the diplomatic corps. And he walked into the show just as Philip Mason was going over to buy a painting, a little drawing of mine, and he walked up and decked Mason. And no one liked Philip, anyone that had anything to do with him didn't like him, and I was one of those. I looked around the room after it had happened. I saw a considerable number of people with big smiles on their faces as Mr. Mason bit the dust. I think he's still around.
Did Fred Nile get his back up at some point about Goodvibes? Did he make some noise? I don't know. The Reverend Fred, I vaguely have some recollection of that.
Look, that may have been conflated from the story about the Bishop of Melbourne. Yes, there were disapproving sounds, but they're lost in the mists of time now.
Yeah. Quite early on, I guess Levi saw the commercial power of the captain, and they approached you to sort of use him as a promoter, almost a sponsored figure, and weave it into the cartoon. But it didn't seem like you didn't sell out. Like you kept the tone pretty much in accordance with the captain. You didn't really toe any lines, so to speak.
Look, it was an extremely painful incident. We lived well below the breadline. We were actually, technically poor, although we were in other ways very rich. We rented a place for almost nothing up at Palm Beach. But this bloke, who was an account executive, I don't know what they're called now, but he was in charge of the Levi's account for an advertising agency, and he approached me to do a couple of things, and they came up with the idea. And because we were so, I wouldn't have done it, but because we were broke, I said, yes, I'll do a couple of ads, and they didn't pay me that much for them. And then I said, look, I don't want to do anymore. He said, Tony, we want to use him. We want to adopt him as a kind of corporate image or mascot. I thought, I said, look, I'm not really that interested. You offer me a few grand and then you're going to insist on this and that and chew him out and spit him out. And then
Levi's Jeans, a big company.
Yeah. And he said, Tony, I'm not talking about a couple of $1,000s. I said, oh, what are you talking about? He said, millions. Oh. And to be honest, my reaction was, I thought I was going to shit myself. I had to leave the room and go to the dummy. It viscerally, because we were living on the smell of an oily rag,
yep.
I just suddenly thought, oh, God. And I thought, this is going to upset everything, Funnily enough, I found it both attractive and unattractive. And so I said, I rang up Sal and said, look, do you reckon we could cope with being millionaires? He said, not a problem. So I went back in and I'd regained control over my bowels and said, yes, we'll do it. But he was bullshitting me, He was just playing me along.
Right.
And after that, when I said, yes, I'll go along with this, after that he started getting narkier and more demanding, and he'd come up and say, without ringing, he'd just walk into the house and say, do this for tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so one day we had a few people around. He came in and said, I want this by tomorrow morning. I said, get fucked, just no, bugger off. And his face dropped. I mean, that was I don't know. I don't think there ever would have been millions, to be honest, because it kept on, receding into the distance. When I said, well, when's the big deal happening? Oh, yeah, pretty soon. We just need another couple of drawings, So they were leading me on and on.
He was never quite a pig in shit,
Yeah, so I did submit to his offer, but in the end I saw that he was just playing me along, and there never would have been millions.
But I guess it's indicative of the times that a brand like that would take a gamble.
Yeah.
Even on a character like Goodvibes, obviously they kind of screwed it up a little bit, but it's interesting. You couldn't imagine a brand of that status now taking a gamble on a character like that.
No, of course not. No, but they did then, and look, a number of all the big surfing companies approached me at one time or another, And I've emerged from that embittered to a certain degree. I never took any offers seriously after that. And a lot of them talk big, but there was never any money. And the same, there were all sorts of offers, films, bloody.
What about the spin-offs? There were quite a few. There was the albums, and then they did make a short film.
Yeah. Well, that was an extremely painful exercise. I mean, the problem is with people like me. It's not just me, but artists and composers, whatever, writers tend to be solo. They're not team players. Their particular idiosyncratic gift is not a result of a committee. It's that one, the one person. So, and all those other media are collaborative. So, and film is particularly collaborative. And the producers, directors have got to be like generals, because they're basically trying to command a rabble of
independent thinkers.
Independent, undisciplined thinkers. So they've got to sort of, and I didn't fit in with that world at all. So we made a film, but of course the director, the guy that wanted to direct it, was getting his girlfriend in to be the script assistant. She couldn't type, and then he wanted another girlfriend to star in it, and she couldn't act. And so you suddenly start to see your little baby become someone else's toy, and it's heading for a cliff. So I pulled out. He wound up telling me that I was wedded to failure, which I've always I've liked that expression. In a way, it's true, But I'd have to say, whilst I'm wedded to failure, it's been a long and successful marriage.
It's a very good wedding. But we did see, I mean, at sort of the height of his fame, there'd be Goodvibes doing the surf report on Double J.
Yes, with Jarrett was...
so who would be the voice? Were you the voice?
I did the voice.
So you actually had to be the voice as well?
Yeah, Jarrett, got, when he was tracks editor, Double J started up, and they said to him, "Do you want to do the surf report?" And maybe Phil didn't have a lot of kind of expressiveness in his voice. He's a very good speaker, but he wasn't right for radio, I don't think. And he wanted to sort of spice it up a bit. So he said to me, "Why don't we go together and do it?" I said, "Oh, okay." And we went in for an audition, and he said, "Oh, do a sort of gravelly voice or something," and we just made it up on the spot. And we went into a recording studio, well, it was a broadcast studio, and we said to the bloke, "Okay, well, what I'll do is be Goodvibes. I'll punch through the wall. I'll fly in through the brickwork and then just pick up the mic." He said, "Great." He said, "We'll do a sound effect of the slamming of the studio door, and then after the door slams, you come on as in your gravelly voice." So we did this, and he slammed the door, but because they're big, heavy, soundproof doors, it came off the hinges and ripped off the wall, and it fell on top of the producer. Of course, everyone started laughing. They thought, "This is hilarious." And I don't think I even used the voice. So he got the job on the strength of someone else's misadventure. So that went for a few years, 5 years. But at the voice, I don't think I can do it anymore. Hang on. "Who is I like that?" Anyway.
I think you still got it, yeah.
Yeah, anyway, it eventually caused damage to my vocal cords.
Right.
And I was told I had to go and see an ear, nose and throat specialist. And he said, "What are you doing?" He said, "You have severe deterioration in your vocal cords." And I said, "Oh, I'm an agricultural announcer at the ABC." He was an old style. He was a Sir George Halliday or something like that.
Yeah.
And he had a stenographer with him when he was describing my throat, just bronzing on the the larynx. And he said, "What on earth are you doing to you?" And so he said, "You've got to stop that immediately because they'll hemorrhage and then you won't be able to speak." So I had to. That was the end of my radio career.
Did you? I think you did it. There was the animation as well that appeared before one of the surf movies with the voice. Did you do it? Did you do the voice?
Yeah, did the voices for that. Yeah.
And then appeared on live. I think you appeared live on stage a couple of times.
Just
in the suit.
I made a suit. Yeah. So the theatre's not there anymore. It was a huge old picture theatre called the Regent, just down from the town hall. And the idea was that I'd be on the stage in my pig suit and perform, I think it's called autofellatio on myself.
With the snout.
With the snout, go down on myself. And then they had a trapeze, what do you call them? Anyway, I was on a wire, counterbalanced wire. So just as I'd finished blowing myself, they lifted me up in the air. And so I disappeared up into the gods, or no, not the gods, the heights of the stage behind the screen. So that got a bit of a laugh. And then at interval, I had to come out there was a little royal box on the side of this theatre and deliver a diatribe to the audience. And I forgot my lines, and so I just said, I've forgotten my lines. And they were, so that made me remember them. I went on.
What was the context? What was the?
I was basically.
What was the show? What was the show? Was it Goodvibes' his own show?
No, it was just a warmer. There was it was a rock concert.
Right.
There was Cold Chisel, Midnight Oil, and a whole lot of other bands there.
So you were sort of introducing the band.
I was introducing the band, and but the pièce de résistance or whatever was halfway, just before interval, I was to swing across the stage on this trapeze wire, about 10 metres off the ground. It was pretty, and we did a rehearsal of it, and I knew I was going to die, where they launched me on one side of the stage and I flew over, and there was a bloke at the other side to catch me, and it went okay because it's pretty standard stuff in theatre anyway, So, and they had all the equipment there, so I swung across and he caught me. It worked in the rehearsal, and then on the night, I swung across. The spotlight missed me, so no one saw me come across. They were all getting up to leave. And when I got to the other side, there was no catcher there.
You felt like you were in the trapeze show
and
without
so
the
I
catcher.
bashed into the wall. I think I broke a toe or something. I hurt myself anyway. And it turned out the bloke, I shouldn't mention him by name, there'd been a security breach and a whole lot of groupies had got in behind, had gone backstage looking for rock singers. And they saw this bloke up and thought he was one of them. And anyway, he was ushered off into some quiet spot for a blowjob from one of these girls. And he left his station and poor old me, bashed into the wall.
You were trying to do this self-fellatio. He was getting the real job backstage.
The real thing, yeah. So I thought, that was my stage career. Yeah, one appearance.
It was certainly a good cameo. I mean, you said it became industrial at times, so we had to churn out the deadlines. Did you ever have to? Did life imitate the art a little bit? Did you have to, down a bottle of red wine or smoke a spliff to get in the mood?
Well, no, that was part of the problem. Was the consumption of pot became industrial too, because I couldn't do it unless I was stoned.
Right.
It got to that point where I'd exhausted any of my own ideas, and I was relying on the cosmos to project ideas into my head, and so I started smoking huge amounts. It wasn't good for my health at all. So at a certain point,
when did you decide? Okay, he's had a good innings. Maybe it's time to. I think sometime in the early '80s.
Yeah, 81. I think
to wind up the regular comic strip.
Yeah, I think that the tracks had changed. It was a little. It was published in Whale Beach, and it was a tiny little cottage enterprise, and it was sort of left leaning, and it was dinky, and then Philip Mason bought it, and he moved the office into town. The whole thing changed, and it became more a vehicle for selling the nascent surfing industry's wares, because none of that was there in the beginning. There were a couple of kind of small time things. So suddenly surfing was huge. It was no longer a rebellious sort of underground thing. It was very much above ground, and there were millions of dollars floating around, and it was big business. So, and I just thought, I'm sick of it, and so I pulled out.
And I guess over time, even though it's a figment of your imagination, have you come to think of it sort of Goodvibes somewhat fondly, sort of a bit like a pet in hindsight? How do you think of it or frame it now?
Look, I think there's an element of pride in there that I did it, but there's also shame. I think, oh God, this was appalling. I suppose as you get older, I don't know about you, but you try and invent yourself as something you'd like to be, or that I imagine that I'm not that yobbo-ish or base or schoolboyish, but I mean, of course, I know underneath everyone is. You don't ever change that much, but there's a certain degree of embarrassment about it now. But wry amusement as well.
But you always had this other parallel life where you managed to maintain it as a painter.
Yeah, well, but there's, look, there's no money in that. It's a mug's game. I mean, I'm getting ready for a show now, a little one next year. And if you worked out the hourly rate of what you get paid for what you do, it would be almost negative, minus $50 an hour. No, it's unless you're independently wealthy, you can't really be a successful painter. You've got to. There's a couple, like 1 in 10,000. It's slightly better than winning the lottery. Same with writing. Who makes a living writing? Tim Winton, one or two others. But the great bulk of people who are writing have to sustain themselves in other ways. But yeah, it's the same with painting.
Is there a sort of a dual pride, though, in that you've sort of accomplished things in both, I guess, I don't want to call Goodvibes low art, but sort of pop culture and high art as well? Yeah,
no, I like that. I like that, I mean, I'm not part of the art world, but I sort of know people in it, and they're a stuffy lot. A lot of them are, it's very, strangely enough, you'd think it'd be otherwise, but they're a pretty macho lot. It's male-dominated, but interestingly, a lot of the best painters are women and always have been. It's just that they're pushed to one side. It's incredibly pretentious, and it's a complete bubble, a pretentious bubble. And I blanch when I read things that artists say. Oh my God, I'm amazed. To me, I mean, I don't want to be part of that world. I don't want to be on top of that world. But it's looking at it from the outside. It seems like the very worst painters are on top, and all the better ones are just this anonymous blob beneath there. Many of whom are women that the general public would never ever hear about. It's only if you have an interest in that sort of realm that you know about them. Why aren't these people being lauded? And why are people like Arthur Boyd or John Olsen regarded as gods? It's just, it doesn't work for me. I don't know how they...
Are we in the era of where self-marketing trumps all else?
Yeah, well, self-promoting will often pay off if you like that. Some people are. But, when you're on the bottom of the pyramid, you're bound to be, an embittered whinger. So,
would you ever is it sort of almost like you'd like to unleash Goodvibes, or your Goodvibes alter ego, to unleash it on the art world in a sense? There's what would you say about it?
Yeah, look, yes, you'd get into trouble. I mean, there's a lot of extremely large and extremely fragile egos out there. I did for a while a little strip in the National Times called Art and Beyond, which was about a couple of professional grant recipients, and that in a way it probably got a higher level, or people further up the food chain criticising it. Donald Horne, for instance, who wrote The Lucky Country, he approached the editor of the National Times and said he wanted that ghastly strip removed because it was anti-art. It was basically putting the hoof into the Australia Council, which was the government's instrument for funding the arts. But of course, all the money goes to the opera company and the theatre company and a few sort of pretentious form fillers outers that get they got studios in Tuscany and Paris, and it's all.
I guess that was one of the great liberties of the anthropomorphised pig, is that you can slay the sacred cows.
Yeah. So I suppose I did it with another strip and with other characters, but I was surprised at the vitriol that generated. But again, in a tiny little world, and it was at a higher level. Like the people that were offended by the pig were not. It was never the decision makers or the powerful. It's just the ordinary bloke on the street. Well, it was mostly blokes, not very many women.
Well, it's still the most requested item in Tracks. Bring back good vibes. And we have brought him back this issue. We're bringing him back for the cover of the next issue.
Yeah, God.
Is it, I mean, now that you can do it sort of in a more sort of complacent fashion, do you enjoy revisiting it at times?
Look, I sort of did, but I realise it's really different from painting. Like it's a different for me. It's a different state of mind, I suppose. I mean, I knew what I wanted to do for this.
We might actually, Sam, if we're going to talk about the painting, we might actually do it. We might as well get it in vision. What do you think? It makes sense, doesn't it?
Well, Sam's probably been subsumed by cobwebs and blue-tongued lizards. Where is he?
He's just, Sam? Yeah, he's out there fighting them off. I was just going to ask Tony about revisiting Good Vibes for the cover, but in that sense, rather than he's sort of, when you're talking about something visual, it always feels a lot better when the vision that you're talking about is in front of you. I think.
Yeah, it's pretty robust.
So if you want to hold it up, Tony.
Yeah, okay. Let's put it. So here we are.
This will probably go as like a different segment if we want to do it separately. So Tony, what's it like revisiting Good Vibes so many years later?
Well, I realised I was a bit rusty, and I've got fewer brain cells now too, so it was a bit hard to try and condense everything down into one thought bubble. But look, it was fun to go back there, But I realise it's incredibly different to painting. Painting's a bit zen-like. Maybe it's more indulgent. You can, and lyrical. It appeals to my better nature. The cultured me, or the lyrical me. But this was, brassy, in your face. Although this is not, I don't think this is particularly confronting. But it's, I wouldn't use these paintings, these colours in one of my other paintings, nor the character or whatever. No, look, it was fun to do. Was
it hard to come up with a quip or a line that captures a zeitgeist in a different era?
Oh yeah, no. Well, I always had trouble with the lines, but yes, I think that one took a while. We had to go backwards and forwards a few times to get that right. Actually, the one that I liked best was Surf's Crap, Let's Go Shopping, but... But I showed that one to Sally. She said, "That's terrible." Even though she'd never read a strip, she said, "No, you can't say that." I thought it was funny, but no, this one's good because it encapsulates the fact that he's now 50, and that he's embraced modern technology. Even to the extent that it's going to bring about his destruction in about 3 seconds, but.
He can home deliver waves. Is it good fun to take something iconic like Sydney Harbour though and bend it to your imagination. I imagine it must be, yeah.
Yeah, so no, I mean, I would love to. Sydney's become, it looks to me like a bad third grade science fiction set. It's just horrible.
Yep.
And I think a nice big cleansing wave coming through would probably make it look a lot nicer. Then we could
start from scratch again.
Start from scratch, yeah.
So much for the Emerald City.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, make it all black and bubbly. Anyway, yeah, but that's a little fantasy. Yes, it's a very destructive one. Of course, I shouldn't think like that, but I don't much like the city anymore.
Do you want to give us one more shot at the voice reading the caption of Captain Goodvibes?
Oh, okay. See if I. Hang on. Hey, Astro, I'm 50. I'm God, and I get me wives home delivered. Oh.
There it is. Well done. Thank you very much, Tony Edwards.
Okay.